asylum seekers come to this country, they've usually been travelling for months, if not years. So they've left behind their families, their homes, everything that they hold dear, and they've been stripped of all agency during that journey. They've had to rely on criminal gangs who have told them where to go and forced them into dangerous conditions. You know, people have crossed deserts, people have crossed seas, people have walked and walked and walked for miles. They have nothing left except the clothes on their back, and you don't know where it is you're going to. You don't know the geography of the country, and you're very often sent to areas of the country that you've never heard of as a foreigner here. So you know about London, but you probably don't know much about the northeast.
It's important to recognise as well that that dispersal system works on a no-choice basis. So you have no choice over where you are dispersed to. It might be Glasgow, it might be Manchester, it might be Birmingham. In 2012, that model shifted to a privatised model effectively, whereby you now had 6 centralised contracts from the Home Office to 3 central providers, G4S, Serco and Clearsprings. They often subcontracted that down to, it might be individual landlords, or it might be housing associations to some extent, or private contracts within that. And so you have this kind of subcontracting chain that was arising. But the key significant shift there was from a role of the local authority in terms of these consortium bids to the role of only very few centralised agencies.
They've probably lived over the last months or years in incredibly squalid conditions, dangerous conditions, never knowing how long they'll be in one place or another. And the very least we can do from a point of view of helping them to psychologically recover is to give them a safe place where they can go to, where they can feel comfortable, where they can relax, and where they can start to rebuild a sense of selfhood and a sense of security.
Sign this, I gave you this property. I said, no, I didn't sign because I can't open my luggage, it's very, very dirty. He said, if you didn't sign, I kick you out to the street and you should sleep in the street and with you and your children. And I crying. He said, you don't have any way. Go to the street or sign this. Believe me. And I'm crying and my daughter crying. I sign. I forced to sign. In the kitchen full of the water because the washing machine was broken, and the refrigerator full of the insects. I said that the householder asked me, this property was from G4S.
I had a little baby at that time. My son was only 5 months old, and G4S gave me and my son a very horrible house. Even dogs would not live in that kind of houses. There were cockroaches, slugs, rats, disgusting environment.
And we begging the householder, the G4S, the landlord, but they didn't do anything. And every winter we had problem with this heater. For example, two winter I didn't have warm water, and I should put pot for my daughter and wash my daughter. They said me, leave it with us. In 3 weeks we change for you. 3 weeks take 3 winter and 2 summer I was there.
And the environmental health services came just to see where we were, and it was really bad, horrible place to live.
And when environmental services saw your accommodation, what did they do? What was the response?
Oh, they said it was really bad. I think grade A or something, that it was really, really horrible. The houses were damp, cockroaches everywhere. I had a situation where there were cockroaches inside my baby's milk, my baby's bottle, yeah, and that was terrifying. And when I rang G4S regarding the situation, they were nasty and they said, "You're just a bloody asylum seeker anyway. You don't have this kind of accommodation where you came from, so you're supposed to appreciate the fact that we're giving you this kind of place." To be honest, he made me feel really worthless, and they treated me like I'm some sort of dirt. When they decided to rehouse me and my son, they took me and my son to another accommodation, and when I got there, that was really horrible, more than where we left, where I was before. So I said, I'm not gonna accept to live here because this is even more horrible than my previous place. And they were saying, because I'm an asylum seeker, I don't have any right to choose or to say, I'm not gonna live in this property. I haven't got that right, that I am on a no choice basis, that what the order is from Home Office. So I said, no, I'm not gonna live here with my son. And they forced my stuff into the property. So I said to them, you need to stop taking my things into this property because I'm not gonna live in that house. So, and they were actually, pulling my stuff. I was actually like pulling my stuff as well from them not to take it in. And I had a friend with me. She was holding my baby at that time. And there were neighbors as well who saw the way they treated me. I was struggling with them, like, no, I'm not gonna go into this property. So they were forcing my stuff and I was bringing the stuff out. And I think because when they saw the neighbor intervene and said, why are you being horrible to this woman? If she says she doesn't want this property, she doesn't want it. And the neighbor testified that that property has been abandoned for years. Why would you want to give a human being that kind of property? And they said to the neighbor, it's none of your business, keep out of it. So I think my friend came, and when they saw that we were beginning to draw a crowd, they ran off with my stuff for a good 6 hours. I had my baby's bottle, milk, electric kettle, everything. So my baby didn't have any milk for more than 6 hours.
Welcome to Great Britain.
G4S and Serco had no real experience of providing this form of housing before the onset of Compass. They had experience, as I've mentioned before, that came from deportation flights, detention centres and so on. So their experience of actually engaging with asylum seekers was very different from the context of what is effectively provision of housing in a kind of care context. And that's very different. So I think we have to remember that they don't have that kind of level of experience and expertise. And they tried to develop that, of course. But at the same time, I think we could have thought differently about, well, what are the types of providers that we might bring in to do this. So there's a message in the choice of provision, I think.
There was about maybe 20 people or maybe more in one house. It was really busy house, and I had 2 kitchens, really dirty, and it wasn't really clean. Even the animals can't live in the house. John said that it's like the roof is like big hole in the roof comes down, and sometimes my room roof is leaking, the water is leaking. There's, I think, 2 or 3 toilet and bathroom, and 2 of them is it's out of service, you can't use it. It's making me really feel bad, when you're sleeping in the house and on the floor, you hear it on the floor, the mouse, it's full of the mouse on the floor. Even when I'm sleeping at night, I can hear it. So, yeah, it's really feel you like you're not leaving. It's like actually from when I came to this country, it's like I came to the big prison.
Doncaster. The lady was put into, it was a bed and breakfast basically from G4S, and she had a newborn baby. It was one room, and where she bathed the baby in a little sink was within the toilet. And she also washed the utensils there and everything. And she couldn't open the window. So the room was really hot and the heating didn't go off. It was appalling. And the baby was like dehydrated and things like that. That's when I first encountered the asylum housing. And we had to put up a big fight with G4S to remove this woman here. And the only way that we did that was by threatening G4S, saying we're going to the Children's Society about child abuse, and then they eventually did move her to a decent place. In Sheffield, I went into a house where 2 pregnant women shared one room that fitted 2 single beds and nothing else. They couldn't move, there was no space for them to move. Their clothes they put in a drawer outside of the door, and the 2 women didn't know each other, so there was no privacy between them. So they sort of like put a cloth across to separate themselves from each other. So, and the place was infested with rats. There was ceiling was leaking from the bathroom. It was awful. They'll put the women with children where it's dangerous for the children within the environment around or within the place. It's dangerous for the children because like the mum would have to lock the child in the room to go to the kitchen or to go to the bathroom. It's not acceptable. If you phone them, they take forever to come. And if you complain, you get victimized.
Regarding you kind of exposing them, if you're an asylum seeker, they might move you to very bad accommodation again, or take you out of, where you are, like to another city. Let's say if you're in Sheffield, they might move you to somewhere like Scotland or something.
And have you heard of that happening?
Oh yeah, a lot.
For example, now I'm sit here, but I know a few people, they scary about come here and to speak everything. They scary and about G4S and anything,
The one lady that we helped, she was threatened to say that the Home Office would refuse her status if she continued to complain. She was pregnant. She moved from Bradford to Leeds, from Leeds to Sheffield. When she complained here in Sheffield, then they moved her back to Leeds. I followed her up to Leeds, and where she was staying was absolutely appalling. There's one woman that did come up, and now she went underground, basically because she got victimized from where she was staying, and she within Sheffield this was her network group. So where they sent her, she didn't know anybody there, and it was a house even worse than anything else. And we tried to locate her. She didn't answer her phone anymore. That's how G4S works. They do feel threatened, and I know a lot of women that I work with now, that I help, that I said to them if they would like to come for an interview. They're afraid. And I said to them, don't be afraid, it will be okay. They won't, because they're scared that G4S will come back to them and say, you complained about this particular house, especially if they give a story knowing that it relates to where they actually are living within. So they won't come back.
People have been moved because they've complained, and I've already explained what the significance of being moved is away from your support networks and your local contacts. And don't forget that people have a fear, which is partly why they're here, of authority and of arbitrary and terrible things happening. So somebody who to us is a kind of, housing worker on just above the minimum wage and with some kind of badge, if they tell an asylum seeker from Afghanistan, ask for a new fridge again and we'll tell the Home Office, potentially that for them means deportation to Afghanistan. So there are moves, there are threats, there are arbitrary conditions imposed, curfews for no reason, there are signs put up for no handwritten signs from one day to the other. You're not allowed to have friends there, you're not allowed to have friends stay over, you're not allowed to leave the house. So that kind of punishment, or the threat of punishment more importantly, is something that's very real in my experience.
Most of them are terrified of the G4S and Home Office because they're told regularly that if they complain, and certainly if they go public, this will affect their asylum claims. Now that's not true because the two different tracks are on, but they believe, and obviously if G4S are telling them that, then, they're very unlikely then to complain or, go public.
To be wielding that power over people who are fearful, who have good reason to mistrust the authorities in their lives, to believe that they could have that power over them, is absolutely indefensible.
People put up with it because they're looking for safety. So for them, we live with the rats, we live with the fleas, or we live squashed up, but at least we're safe.
We also have to think about the wider messaging of this. What message does it send to kind of effectively privatise the housing of vulnerable individuals, and how does that relate to the forms of support that might be provided for people as well? The other contracts that things like that G4S have and Serco have in terms of the asylum estate are things like detention centres and deportation contracts historically. So what we're effectively saying is that the forms of social care and support that we're providing for people within the asylum system are being provided by the same people who might also be deporting people from the country as well. And I think that is quite a significant political and symbolic message.
This is the kind of sort of politics, the political context of all the system. And of course that percolates right down to presenting, a refugee from fleeing from all sorts of things, giving them a rat-infested, cockroach-infested house in Leeds. That's where the hostile environment bites individual children and families in a way that is, I use the word obscene rather than shocking. It's beyond the bounds of normal kind of comprehension, I think.
It's absolutely dysfunctional for us as a British society, because what's good for our society, what's helpful and what will be the best for our communities is that when these people arrive, that they go through the fastest, most efficient process possible and are helped to integrate and to be part of our societies and to feel safe and to feel at home and to recover. Because it's not good for our society to have people with exacerbated mental health conditions. It's not good for our society to have people dropping out of the system and becoming undocumented and therefore not being able to contribute but also just access basic services. That all contributes to a breakdown in community cohesion. It contributes to a breakdown in general health of the population. It contributes to all sorts of ills for the whole society. So a well-functioning asylum system where people are welcomed, where people are given the chance to recover, that is what is best for British communities.
the core aspect of Compass from a policy perspective, or certainly the stated rationale, was around austerity and around wider kind of government cuts. So the fact that the Home Office was facing quite significant demands to reduce its budget between, say, 2010 and 2013, and Compass was seen to be one way that you could actually do that. So it was announced as a policy to actually reduce the cost to the taxpayer of accommodating asylum seekers. Actually, economically, it hasn't made those significant savings. And that's partly because there were greater startup costs and transitional costs, I think, than were expected. And some of those costs were borne by providers, but some of them were unable to be borne by providers. And I think, secondly, there are costs that then are knock-on effects of cutting back in other areas. So what you're doing is not necessarily, you might be saving money in that contract, but you're spending more money elsewhere effectively. So you might see knock-on effects to local authority support for, say, destitute asylum seekers, in terms of healthcare provision, in terms of mental health care provision, these kind of things. That if you don't get the support structures right, you're not able to provide for vulnerable people upon their kind of arrival into the dispersal system, then you're storing up problems elsewhere within that kind of social care system.
These hugely, unsatisfactory contracts that are being paid for out of you and I's pockets can just be renewed indefinitely, because you may get an investigation into it, but it's not going to reach enough people, because it's going to be these worthy woolly lefties who they care about this anyway, and the conversation in this country is so geared towards this angry hatred of immigration in general, that their concerns and their humanity are simply brushed aside.
On the basis of what we've seen of the Compass contracts, and the basis of what we've seen in terms of the actual provision of accommodation, these kind of things, I don't think that they're the most appropriate provider for that. I think fundamentally there is something different that happens when you move from a kind of social care position to a position that has at its core profit making. And we can, it's a simplification of the complexities of the public-private division, but I think in this case it's really significant and it's important. And it's important not just for asylum seekers who are within the dispersal system and the message it sends them, but it's important more widely. It's important to the wider public to get a sense that the provision of asylum accommodation should be a public kind of concern. It's a public good. Taxpayers' money goes into it, but it also should reflect values. It should reflect the value of providing good quality accommodation for people who are vulnerable, who have sought sanctuary in the UK, and who often kind of respect the UK on the basis of our history of human rights and other claims that we like to make. But often I think that gets lost if we start to think about how we can do this as cheaply as possible, or how we can do this in the most easy manner, or if we start to use that as a way of deterring potential asylum seekers from seeking sanctuary in the UK in the first place.
I can look back and I can probably identify literally hundreds of babies and young children whose early learning has been blighted by the kind of conditions that G4S and the Home Office, because you've got to remember the Home Office, G4S can't move people into accommodation, can't move people from accommodation to another without specific say-so from the Home Office. So although I always mention G4S in this context, they are acting on behalf of the Home Office as well, which makes it doubly appalling